it is always exciting to have a Canadian company going to the process that is relatively new. And what is also interesting about this is that Zephyr already had a device, and we were hoping that their device would be a predicate to the new model, but the FDA said no, and that's how the de novo started. So I will just give a little bit of kind of stepping back and a little bit of introduction to the FDA. As you know, the FDA quality system regulations recognizes several classifications. So you can be a class 1 device, which is low risk, and in general, you just need to register with the FDA, which is very low cost. Then you have class 2 devices, and this is what most of the people are working with, and they are moderate risk, and you're going through the 510K process. And when you're doing the 510K, you are technically proving that your device is substantially equivalent to the device that is already on the market. And I think that was the idea for Zephyr as well, that it will be 510K route. And then you have class 3 devices, which are high-risk devices, and you have to go through pre-market approval, and those are the devices that are really dangerous. They can kill you or injure you, and for these ones, you have a much longer path, and there is a lot of clinical that is involved, much more requirements, pre-market approval, inspection of manufacturing facility, et cetera. And then the FDA realized that when there is no predicate and the device is not class 1, the regulations were putting those not substantially equivalent devices automatically in a class 3. And then they came up with the idea of having a little bit easier pathway, and that's how the de novo was born, as a low to moderate risk pathway for the devices that do not have predicates. So this is a risk-based approach. In general, the devices can be controlled with general controls, and in some cases, some special controls. And there is a reasonable assurance that the device is still going to be safe and effective for its intended use. And what really this allows is that the novel technologies can go to the market faster. It also sets up a system where you now have a new predicate, more recent predicate that can be used. And for all of you who are getting in touch with the FDA, there is a trend where they are actually discouraging you to use all predicates. And I think they're going to be seeing more and more rejections of substantial equivalence, because they're going to say it's technologically significantly different, and you have to take a de novo as an option to the 510K. So a little bit about the history of de novo. I like the acronyms from the FDA: FDAMA, FDASIA, like all very nice. So you have links in this presentation. I think the presentations are going to be available. Food and Drug Administration Modernization Act of FDAMA from '97 first introduced the de novo devices. In 2011, we got the first guidance published. In 2012, the Food and Drug Administration Safety Innovation Act, or FDASIA, provided more modification to streamline and increase the efficiency of the program. In 2013, this is really significant because for the first time, they published de novo summaries. So this was important because now you could use the devices that are listed for your own predicates for 510K submissions. Then in 2017, with MEDUFA, there was a new guidance on how the process for the submission and the review for de novo is going to work for the requests. And then finally, in 2018, the FDA is actually working on a rule to actually establish the regulations for the de novo classification process, because right now there is no regulation for this program. So what is the hope is that this new regulation is going to provide a real structure and clarity and transparency around the de novo process, that is going to set up clear requirements for the format and the content, and it's going to outline the criteria for accepting, granting, declining, and withdrawing the de novo requests. So just to switch a little bit gear, we heard a lot today about financing, how hard it is to get the investors buying in. And if you look at the prices for different fees, we can just focus on 510K, $10,000, PMA, 322,000 something and change, and de novo $96,000. It's quite a different financially when you're financing your company. The one point that I want to make here that there is a small business fee. So if you can get from the tax agency your revenues, and if they are less than $100,000, you can be paying the small business fee. And if you are actually under $30 million, then your first PMA may be free. So this is something to consider from that point. But you have to be very careful. There is a guidance that you can look at. And you have to be very careful if you're planning to sell the company, because whoever is buying it, if they already have a PMA, they may be actually charged. So it really works if you want to be a standalone company. But it also impacts how your whole regulatory strategy is going to work. We have one client currently who is selling in Europe under CE mark, and they don't have substantially equivalent device in the United States. They could have gone de novo or PMA. They chose PMA. The reason why they chose it is because they don't want somebody else getting to the market fast with using them as a predicate. So strategy can be different. So finally, before I pass it on to Sabina, it is good to know that since the de novo started, we had 235 new devices getting through the pathway and 117 since 2012. So obviously it took FDA some time to catch up with the new process. And what is here important that we have the first time some of the technology available to the patients. So the first self-fitting hearing aid, the first mobile app to help to treat substances use disorders, the first artificial intelligence software, and then the Zephyr device. So at this stage, I'm going to pass it to Sabina.
Don't forget about, thank you. And we shouldn't forget about the Apple Watch, which also achieved de novo just shortly after us. Okay, so every good story starts at the beginning. So we'll start at Zephyr Sleep Technology. We're a company that we founded in Calgary. This picture here is taken last week during our spring snowstorms. Zephyr Sleep Technologies was founded in 2010, and we're now partnered with the largest dental supply company in the world, Dentsply Sirona, which has changed things quite a bit for us. And we founded the company on the genius and the ideas of Dr. John Remmers, who really fueled the passion for the problem, and that's the solution. So Dr. John Remmers is largely credited for being the first person to having diagnosed the first sleep apnea back in the late 1960s. He was the first inventor of one of the earliest CPAP machines, and he understands the problem. Sleep apnea, probably a quarter of us in the room here have it. Of the ones of us that have it, I'm just including myself to be inclusionary. I don't actually have sleep apnea, but my 3-year-old daughter was diagnosed with it after I started working for this company, which was interesting. But most of us that have sleep apnea are, the worst part about the problem is not only that we're dying a little bit every night, it's that we're kind of ignoring the problem. And we're ignoring the problem because nobody wants to have a CPAP mask strapped to their face. And nobody understands this problem more than Dr. Remmers, who invented the first CPAP and has been trying to get patients to use it ever since. And the real crux of this issue is there is an equally effective alternative therapy that everybody loves and works really well. It just doesn't work for everybody. It'll work for you and you and you, but not for everybody. And so it gets ignored by the payers, it gets ignored by the doctors, and it has a real challenge, and it only has 5% of the market. So the problem that Zephyr was faced with addressing was how to get the right therapy to the right patient and solve the problem of sleep apnea. This is John with our first solution. It was an in-lab test that can identify who should get the therapy and how to set up the therapeutic device for easy access and all of this stuff. So huzzah, an in-lab test. We're done, we're on the market. It's a great way to start. It's where the reimbursement was in the hospital labs. And off we go. As the technology evolved, we developed an at-home system that we sell to dentists. The device is very easy to use. It's akin to a home sleep test, but it'll also do what we call theranostic guidance to guide you to the correct therapy. The marketing team came up with the Simple Sleep solution, which is a partnership with Dentsply Sirona. I've done everything at Zephyr Sleep Technologies except the marketing, and I can tell you there's nothing simple about this device. From a regulatory perspective, it hits every guidance document in the FDA, the ones that they've thought about and the ones they haven't thought about yet. And I actually wrote this slide without including complications like it runs on artificial intelligence, one of the first devices to do that. It also is a multifunction device, and the two functions belong in two different divisions of the FDA. So this is a complicated device, but not to worry, because we have a predicate that does the exact same thing in nearly the exact same way in the sleep lab. So off we go down our regulatory path with our first in-lab predicate. We submit a 510K. We've done the clinical studies the exact same way that just years earlier they told us to do to clear our predicate device. Same endpoints, same patient population, same clinical trial study. What could go wrong? NSE, not substantially equivalent. It was a bit of a surprise, of course, but you know the FDA is also changing, so you don't spend too long getting surprised. You look up what de novo means, and you figure out what a de novo is, and there's a guidance document, and you take all of your data and you reconfigure, and you think, oh, this is great. We can do a risk-benefit analysis, we can do a de novo, and we're going to be easier to claim that we're the first in the market. What a win all around. It'll take a little time, but honestly, we're not really ready for market anyway. Dentsply Sirona is a very patient partner, and off we go. Well, the next sort of surprise was that in a first teleconference with them, they wanted us to come with a pre-submission to ask questions, to talk about the de novo. And they said, don't worry, it'll take 75 days, formulate some questions. Well, we didn't have any questions. We knew exactly what this device did. We were ready to defend it. And it became very clear very early on that it didn't matter what our questions were, we should formulate some questions, because what the FDA wants, lesson number one, if I've learned it once, if I've learned it now twice, hard, early discussion, and we heard it this morning, early discussion and partnership. These are well-meaning government employees on timelines, and they need to build time into their timelines to meet these MDUFA, to meet their requirements. They need to figure out what your device is as early as you are, not for the purposes of getting feedback, although that's helpful too, but just for the purpose of educating them and helping them come alongside and helping them cushion their own timelines. So make up questions. That's the simple way to do it. Present your technology carefully and simply, and you need to understand their issues and their concerns first and foremost. And mostly their issues and concerns are timelines. They have checkboxes, they have percentages that they need to get out, and they are making decisions based on if they can make a decision, yes or no, within the timeline. And so that's important, and then you need to be prepared to wait, because their 75 days took around 140 days. Of course, they gave you the feedback the day before, so that was a fun night where you're trying to interpret the feedback that they've given you, that you've been waiting months and months for. And then the feedback says, we don't like your clinical study, you need to redo it. And in fact, the reason that they don't like the clinical study and that we need to redo it is because they fundamentally misunderstood the device, because we didn't have early discussion with them. So here they were trying to meet their timelines. They're already 70 days over, and they're trying to make decisions about a clinical trial about a device that they don't yet understand, and they misinterpret the device, and so they tell you to go back and do a clinical trial. Now, they're very nice and kind, and they understood that they had misunderstood it, and they reevaluate it, but what does that take? That takes more time. And so the reality is, we submitted the protocol, let's use dates here, December, May we're getting feedback, July we're getting feedback actually on the protocol that we asked for in the first place. We resubmit a supplement in late August, and we get final feedback in December, a year after we got an NSE from them. And why? Because we didn't have early discussion and we didn't have early interaction with them. Now, you can't build a company and be successful by sitting around and waiting for this kind of timeline, so you have to hedge your bets and take some risks. And so really what I did was I started the clinical study well in advance. The way the story turns out is actually a piece of luck, which we all know we need to have in order to have successful companies. On the 3 days before we were ready to submit the de novo, they came back with changes to the clinical protocol, which actually removed or changed some exclusion criteria. We had to remove some patients. It ended up that we had to remove one patient who we got the wrong answer for, and it made us meet our clinical endpoint. So in the end, that was a stroke of luck. We followed the rules. We cleaned the data in the way that they asked us to, and we were able to submit. So sometimes you have to learn how to do a little bit of that as well. So while you're out there complaining about the timelines and wishing that you had had earlier discussions, you need to make the most of a de novo. De novos, as Vesna said, they're coming more and more. We're seeing, there's a few other devices I'm talking to right now, and de novo is a word that's flying around everywhere. And now that there's a fee attached to it, you can bet that the FDA is going to be pushing de novo more and more. They used to be free. That's another thing that happened while we were waiting for them to give us feedback. So while you're in the de novo, you need to set the bar high. This is your chance to establish the class of device and what clinical data you need. You need to market the de novo achievement and your device's uniqueness, and then you need to also look at, in the US, access to government systems, and you can get ahead of the line procurement, because clearly there is no one else like you because you just had to go through all of this thing, so you need to be able to market that. There's no predicate, that's why you're in the de novo pathway. That doesn't mean you don't make use of the predicate, and use predicates, whatever you can find, to try to reduce your risk or to present your risk. So predicates, though you don't have one officially, form a really important part of your de novo process, and you should make sure that you understand all of the ones that you can. So don't ignore the predicate in the de novo. Your de novo application is going to be big. Ours was 7 binders. We took pictures beside it. We were very proud of this submission, and it was really devastating when we found out that nobody over there was reading every single word of it. They were asking us questions that we couldn't believe that a year and a half later they were still asking us. Again, they hadn't had the time and the number of discussions that they need to really understand a device, particularly a very complicated one, and so you have to be ready for that type of interaction. At the same time, you have to have the information embedded in your submission to be able to draw on those references later. The good news is, in a de novo process, unlike a 510K, you are front and center with management. You're working with the deputy directors of these divisions. These are good, kind, intelligent people that are able to get up to speed very quickly and participate in the discussion. On the flip side, they're also not the ones that have been reading your file for the last 6 months, so they may be bringing you back to some earlier conversations. So management participation is a big difference in the de novo versus the 510K pathway. This is the hardest lesson with regulatory, and this is where regulatory becomes an art rather than a science. You don't want to highlight stuff to create discussions where you don't want to have it, right? Writing a regulatory application is a really, really difficult, it's an act of literature, really, where you're trying to figure out exactly how to present things and where to say what and how to say it. And then you're pretty happy when they don't touch on the stuff that you're worried about, and you think, whew, how'd we get through that? The problem is, they may eventually figure it out, and they may figure it out the day before when they call you up and they say, we never had a discussion about biocompatibility, we never looked at any of your data, and you're gonna have to restrict your use down to 3 days because we don't have the time to deal with this. We got this deadline coming. And I'm thinking, I kind of knew you hadn't looked at biocompatibility. I could have brought that up. I could have mentioned that. Another big one is in the severe sleep apnea space, mild to moderate versus severe is a very contentious issue. Our predicate was mild, moderate, and severe sleep apnea. We put it in the protocol that we were mild, moderate, and severe, but we didn't call it out. And we figured, whew, they've accepted our protocol, off we go. In the final hour, they restricted our device indication down to mild to moderate, which is okay, but it's really an example of where we knew that was a contentious issue and we should have called it out as a discussion point rather than remaining silent on it. So it's a delicate balance, and it's one that you just have to know your own device and hedge your bets. Good news, at the end of the day, they want to win. They want to meet the 150-day goal. They want the de novos. They want these things off your desk, and you can't be afraid to work closely with management. I was on the phone last August with the deputy director, repeatedly giving him exact updates as to when our partner was going to drop us if we didn't get this de novo. He wanted to know the dates. He was pushing from his end. They understand that companies live and die by these timelines, and they're ready to work with you. And that's important to remember, to not be afraid to call them. That's it.